Julie Redeemed, Stefan, then we discuss the top of your choice. Are wormholes real? Are wormholes real? What do you think?
Like the holes that they dig in your garden?
No, I don't think that's the type of wormhole that Julie's referring to.
Because those ones are real.
Those are real? I've never actually seen one of those. So.
Can confirm that those are real. Worms aerate the soil, and so are good natural composters. And aerating the soil is a fancy way of saying they put holes in the soil.
Okay, but
wormholes are shortcuts through the space-time continuum that would allow traveling long distances in short amounts of time.
Yes. So there's this notion of points in space being near each other, right? Like imagine I'm holding my hand up right now, right? So like my hand is in this location, and if I move my hand just a little bit to the side, it's in a new location, and that new location was next to that first location, right? So these 2 points are like adjacent to each other. So you can move basically instantaneously from one point to the point immediately next to it. So that's like how normal space works, right? The idea with wormhole is that there are points that like intuitively seem like they're far apart, but actually they are also adjacent to each other. Yeah, Dusty's bringing up the paper analogy where I guess the idea is I think the way the analogy is typically presented is like you're folding the piece of paper in such a way so that 2 parts of it touch each other, and so now they're adjacent. So you can go to, if you go to that point, you can immediately transfer over to the other thing because they're adjacent. But like from the perspective of, if you think of paper being a flat thing, it looks like you moved a very big distance.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
When you said, imagine my hand, something,
Yes.
Did you hold up your hand?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Thank you.
So that's what the wormholes are. Like, you know, that, but like, is it real, or is it just like, you know, a fantasy thing or a sci-fi thing or whatever, right? Like, is it something that's made up in the way that maybe warp drive from Star Trek is made up?
Right.
I don't know the answer to that. My understanding is that so let me take a step back and talk about how like physics at like theoretical physics works, right? Like, so the idea is that Einstein or whoever will come up with a general theory. It could be about relativity. It could be like Newton came up with this idea about gravitation and so on. And you perform experiments. Like the theory makes predictions, and you can perform experiments to see like, okay, does the result of the experiment match the prediction, right? Like, does a lead ball and a feather fall at the same speed in a vacuum? Because that's one of the predictions about Newton's gravitation. So someone tries it out, and then, you know, it turns out yes. So then it looks like Newton's theory is correct, for example. Einstein's theory of relativity made some predictions about like the position of Mercury, for example, and gravitational lensing about stars. So, you know, you could do the experiments where you look at a telescope at the right moment in the year and see, and then you say, yeah, it seems to work out. But
well, in the sense that really you're looking to see that you can't disprove it.
Right. So
just to be precise.
Yeah, exactly. So for example, technically speaking, like relativity from Einstein and Newton's laws of motions are in contradiction of each other, like technically speaking. In practice, they give the same predictions at everyday scenarios, but when at speeds approaching the speed of light, Einstein makes a different prediction from Newton's, and the experiments show that Einstein's version is more correct than Newton's. But before Einstein, you know, as far as we know, the Newton stuff was right. Like every experiment we tried, you know, it satisfied it. It was only when Einstein came up with his theory that people were. This isn't technically true. I'm simplifying the history a bit, but the simplification is that we thought that, you know, every experiment would support Newton, and then Einstein said, well, what about? I think this theory is true, and here's the different prediction it makes relative to Newton. and then people try the experiment, and then they were like, oh yeah, he's right, actually. Like, in the cases where they basically predict the same thing, then, you know, the same thing happens. Like, the results are support both Newton and Einstein, you know, at low speeds. In the situations where they predict different things, it looks like Einstein's theory gives the correct prediction, whereas Newton's theory gives the wrong prediction. And so we are currently in the state where we're like, okay, so basically it looks like Einstein's thing is right, but it's possible that in the future someone else will come up with another theory that makes a different prediction from what Einstein says. And then when we do the experiment, we turn out
more right.
Yeah, it says, well, actually, you know, so everywhere, you know, it agrees with every experiment we tried before, but now this suggests a new experiment, and then when we try it, turns out Einstein is wrong and this new person is right. But like all the experiments we thought of trying up until now, you know, seem to support Einstein, for example. So that's like a simplified version of how science works. So the thing is, sometimes these theories, like Einstein's theories of relativity, make predictions, and we don't really have a way of testing them. So one of the predictions of Einstein was that black holes exist, like, or it's possible for a black hole to exist. Like if we think of gravity as warping space and light having a finite speed, and like the theory he came up with, it seemed to allow for the possibility of gravity being so strong that light could not escape. And at the time, I don't think we knew about, before that, there was no concept of black holes. But his theory predicted, like, you know, this might be a thing. Like, it's possible that could happen. Whether or not there are actually any black holes in real life, we don't know. But the theory says it's possible for them to exist. And then we looked around and then we found some. So black holes, we've confirmed, are real. So I think wormholes are in a similar situation in that Einstein's theories allow for wormholes to exist, but we haven't actually found one yet.
That is also what I would have answered if under duress and forced to answer the question. So, for whatever that's worth.
Well, okay, so one more interesting thing about wormholes that, like, maybe it's a little known fact. I don't know. Oh, okay. I do believe post a link. I'm assuming that's what the creepy thing is, but I'll get back to it in a moment. So I talked about wormholes connecting different points in space, right? Like, we thought these 2 points were not, like, how do I phrase it? Naively, it seems like these 2 points are very far apart, but actually they're adjacent to each other. So it's very easy to go from one point to another. So one of the things that Einstein, one of the concepts that Einstein's theory introduces is this idea of space-time, meaning like space and time are not two distinct things, but they're
one thing.
Yeah, it's sort of abstract to talk about, like, you know, there's like what are the implications of that, or like what's the difference between it being one thing versus two things, which I don't think I know enough to get into. But one of the you can think of one of the results of that is, like, you know, when I say, okay, imagine I put my hand up or whatever, right? And now I don't move the hand at all. It's still moving through space-time in the sense that it's moving from the past to the future, right? And it's moving adjacently, quote unquote, right? Like it was this like nanosecond, and then the hand was in that nanosecond, the one immediately afterwards, right? So there's adjacency in time as well as in space. So what this also implies is that a wormhole can be distant not only in space, but it can be distant in time. It can link two points that you might not think of as being adjacent in time, actually are adjacent.
Like 1882 and 4 billion years ago.
Yeah, exactly. So you go into the wormhole at one point in space-time, or more, you know, in more intuitive terms, at one point in time, and then you come out at a different point in time, possibly in the future, possibly in the past, depending on how.
Possibly what we might think about of the same space,
yes,
but just in a different time.
Yeah,
possibly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's
like the hot tub time machine.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good
documentary
on Einsteinian relativity.